Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber, and we are reporting on what is now the new Iranian retaliation as the United States enters into this ongoing conflict that began with Israel hitting targets in Iran. Today, Iran firing ballistic missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar, home to about 10,000 American personnel. We have video that shows the missiles apparently intercepted around over Doha. American defense officials tell NBC there were no reports of casualties, no direct hits on the bases. And as we will explain, while this is a very serious matter with tensions in the region, there are new signs tonight of a potential off-ramp. President Trump says Iran even gave the United States advance notice of this particular attack. That airspace over Qatar remains closed. You can see all the U.S. bases in the region, which are considered under what they're calling a, quote, imminent threat, meaning while there could be an off-ramp, this could be it. There are many bases with the U.S. footprint there that are under this warning in case there are other or more strikes. Israel, though, is continuing its attacks on Iran. The country of Israel, led by Bibi Netanyahu, has said that they want to completely disable any nuclear function there. Israeli officials say the military dropped another 100 bombs on targeted sites inside Iran. Now, the American strikes were the big development here, hitting 3 nuclear sites in Iran. The United States explaining that it used something that basically no other countries in the region are believed to have in this manner, a type of bunker-busting bomb, and that it deployed 14. Now, these are massive 30,000-pound bombs. They penetrate deep locations. They are a level of basically war or armory that just most nations don't have. They were dropped by B-2 Spirit bomber planes. This is a video of one of those bombers landing safely all the way back in the United States, specifically in Missouri. The satellite photos show damage to Iranian nuclear sites. There is ongoing debate and sort of both internal, private, and external estimations on what the intelligence can really say about how extensive the damage is. Now, the president on his Saturday night address told Iran that they must now make peace, basically a type of foreign policy there. He was flanked by some of his top aides and vice president and secretary of state, the aides who make both war and diplomatic plans, and basically saying that this is how it's going to be. Quote, the president, said one military official, was the biggest threat to OPSEC, or operational security, that the planning faced. Military planners worried Trump was giving Iran too much warning about the impending strike, including the way he posts and talks. So they worked up their own ruse. They actually had 2 fleets of B-2 bombers leaving Missouri at the same time. Trump did also perhaps sow some level of deliberate confusion about what his or the United States objectives would be. The questions also are swirling. And so on the one hand, the United States under Donald Trump talked about a longer time window, 2 weeks, which could have been a ruse that was effectively used to sort of have Iran put its guard down a little bit or not expect an imminent attack. Although the flip side to that argument is Iran is already under attack from Israel and is sort of doing what it can. But whether the 2 weeks was a ruse, whether there was strategic misinformation, there's also the fact that the basic core policy of the United States for many administrations has been to try to contain Iran, whether that's through diplomacy, accords that have been pursued and then dropped under different administrations, or through a kind of muscular, robust potential military response saying, hey, you cross a nuclear red line, you'll get hit. But either way, remember, the policy has not been regime change. Those are 2 key words that when it comes to Afghanistan, Iraq, or potentially Iran, they make people think of quagmires, of open-ended commitments in the region. That's why military planners, experts in both parties have long said, whatever you want to do to constrain Iran, and many people do not think it should just have a runaway path to nukes, you don't necessarily want regime change. And that's what Trump officials have been saying this week, until Donald Trump threatened to remove Iran's leader, regime change, by posting online. And the headlines follow. The president, who now has shown he's willing to act, is apparently, in his own words, opening the door to regime change in Iran, a problem as they've now tried to counter what the president said.
Well, look, that's up to the Israelis, but our view has been very clear that we don't want a regime change.
This mission was a very precise mission. It had 3 objectives, 3 nuclear sites. It was not an attack on Iran. It was not an attack on the Iranian people. This wasn't a regime change move.
This mission was not and has not been about regime change.
What you're hearing is the sound of many Trump officials on the first blinking light major crisis point of foreign policy in this very volatile region, all trying to undo what their boss, what the United States president did just over the weekend. As you can see, when it comes to the policy, is it regime change or not? And the planning, is there going to be a clear long-term consistent plan for the region that tells U.S. allies and others what the United States is trying to do right now? Those things are clearly in doubt because of the president's actions. On the other hand, there are a lot of military experts who say if this ends here with a targeted strike and no quagmire, this could be a constructive step. I want to bring in Ambassador Dennis Ross, who is returning from the Middle East, including time in Israel. He's the author of the new book, Statecraft 2.0. We have called on him for many tense times in the Middle East with his extensive experience in Middle Eastern relations. He served in the Clinton administration as an envoy in the State Department under the Bush administration, seen as a bipartisan credentialed expert who has also held good faith talks with just about everyone you could imagine in the region, including Israel, then PLO, representatives of Gaza, and through intermediaries, Hamas. He also served in the Obama administration, and that's only a partial CV. Welcome back.
Good to be with you.
Let's start with just the two sort of evidentiary points I mentioned in this introduction. What happened in the strike, and now what's happening with Trump officials trying to, I think, retract what the president said.
Look, I think what was done was an extraordinary military operation, which was on top of what the Israelis have done, which is also an extraordinary set of military operations. You can achieve a great deal in terms of changing the landscape, the physical landscape, the psychological landscape using force. But you need to marry it to a political strategy if you're going to produce an enduring outcome. We have seen the landscape of the Middle East as we know it change. Iran has been dramatically weakened by what the Israelis have done, and now what we've added on. They've lost their proxy network. So the combination of no longer being able to threaten others through the proxy network, the reality that their nuclear infrastructure has been dramatically set back. I mean, it's almost impossible to say you've destroyed it. Sorry.
And just explain your proxy network, you're talking non-state actors. Explain that, please.
All right. I'm talking about Hamas may still be in control of Gaza, but they're no longer military. Hezbollah had 150,000 rockets and controlled Lebanon. Hezbollah has done nothing in response to what Israel has done. This was the most important actor, the crown jewel of the proxy network that the Iranians had. It was not an insurance policy for the Iranians. It was the deterrent against the Israelis doing what they've done. Because if they had 150,000 rockets, they could have saturated any missile defense capability or network that the Israelis had. And that would have deterred them from going after Iran. So that's gone. The Shia militias in Iraq have not fired at the Israelis, notwithstanding what's been done. We're hearing all the different militias basically saying Iran can handle this by itself, which, by the way, is the language the Iranians have always used when the U.S. would hit the militias. They're strong enough to handle this by themselves. So we're seeing a real change fundamentally in the military balance of power, in the weakness of Iran, and so forth. So, the application of military force has been quite remarkable. Now, B, the question becomes, okay, what comes next? In terms of what you're talking about, the mixed messages from the administration, you could ask the question, did the president raise the issue of regime change, at least subtly, as a form of coercion on the Iranians, as a way of getting the Iranians to give in to what he wanted? After all, he'd been saying for 2 months, there will be no nukes, but I want to resolve it through a deal. And he clearly came to the conclusion that you couldn't resolve it through a deal, at least without the use of force. So now the question becomes, is this use of force going to be in the service of an objective? And the good statecraft is characterized, you have clear objective and you use the means you have to align with those objectives so you can achieve them. If the objective is regime change, as you were suggesting, that's open-ended. We have a terrible track record when it comes to regime change.
And I'm going to jump in again and then let you continue. Very open-ended, quagmire problems, but if the idea is to, as you say, scare them and throw out other what they call maximalist or heavy threats, then why would you want your own defense secretary retracting it?
Well, once you've used force, then you're in a different place. But look,
Yeah.
I would say consistency of message is important. If it was part of a disinformation campaign, if it was part of a coercion effort, you still have certain value in it, provided you don't mislead yourself. We get objectives wrong when we end up misleading ourselves. We need a very clear objective here. And the very clear objective is what the president has said. Basically, this is about them not having nuclear weapons. We should be in a position where what is being done is to ensure that Iran gives up the nuclear weapons option for good. I think here we may be in a position where there's some real potential. It is very interesting to me that the Iranians are following a pattern that I've seen. In the book, I have a chapter on Iran where I say when you look at every administration's approach from Carter to today and the Iranian response, what comes through are a couple of key lessons. Number one, regime survival is the most important preoccupation. Number two, and this dates from when we reflagged ships during the Iran-Iraq War from 1988, from before that, when the Iranians were trying to prevent Iraq from having any revenue so it couldn't carry out the war. It meant there could be no oil trade for them. We reflagged ships and we destroyed a good chunk of the Iranian Navy. We destroyed several of their oil platforms. We inadvertently shot down a civilian airliner. And suddenly Ayatollah Khomeini, after declaring they would fight the war for however long it took, did a ceasefire and said it was like drinking poison from a chalice. From
Yeah.
that time on,
Well, and now I'm jumping in again, Ambassador. I've just been alerted to a post from the president. We were discussing his messaging. This is brand new. The caveats are the president of the United States has just posted a news of what he's calling a ceasefire. We don't have fact checking yet or statements yet from other parties. So you're learning this along with our audience. I'm curious your reaction. I'm going to read. This is also a Truth Social post from President Trump. He says it has been fully agreed, again, claims by the president, quote, by and between Israel and Iran, there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours. And then he says that will go on for 12 hours, quote, at which point the war will be considered. And the president, in his style, writes in all caps, ended. Again, reading further from the new statement moments ago, quote, officially Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to what he is calling this 12-day war, which will, the president says, be saluted by the world. And he goes on to include other details. My question to you is, given this is coming from one side, but either quickly will be confirmed or not, that's how we track these stories. What is your response, and what does that sound like to you, given your voluminous diplomacy experience, that time scale as announced here by the president?
Well, I believe it, and I believe it for a simple reason. We saw the Iranians retaliate today at two places, al-Assad base, where they hit before or after Qasem Soleimani was killed, and Al Udeid base in Qatar. There were no American casualties. It put the Iranians in a position where they could say, we retaliated. One thing Khamenei could not do was look like they simply surrendered to us. So by
Right.
retaliating, he can claim we retaliated. He can claim we inflicted damage on Israel. So they're in a position where they can say, okay, we stood up, we didn't give in. The Israelis were in a position where their military was saying we are pretty close to exhausting all the targets that we needed to be able to take out. And I think that the president, all along, he never wanted to get into what he calls the forever wars in the Middle East. He took on his own base in this regard, who clearly people like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon were very much against taking this step. And his wanting to show that he could use force and then produce a ceasefire quickly makes, in my mind, very credible. The fact that Iran took a step and they can say, we did it, puts them in a position where they can end it. I would also say whether Prime Minister Netanyahu was prepared right now to end it or not, I think he couldn't say no to President Trump on
If-
this. And my
Yeah,
guess
if
is
this-
there's some possibility that this was even coordinated in advance. I could see an understanding where the president said to Bibi, we will do this, but after we do it, the war has to end. I
with an
wouldn't be
off ramp
shocked if
ready.
that
So
was
let
an
me ask you,
understanding.
Ambassador, if this ceasefire holds, President Trump, just here in these moments, breaking news, has announced, posting online, a ceasefire, Israel, Iran, U.S. If this ceasefire holds, is durable, is this a significant foreign policy win for the Trump administration?
It is, but let's look at it. It is, to be fair, it is. The question will be, how do you translate and turn the ceasefire into something that's enduring? A ceasefire is exactly what it says. You're ceasing fire. Does that mean it can't be
Right.
resumed? Are there understandings about if Iran begins to try to reconstitute its nuclear program? Are there any understandings there? Is there going to be a negotiation now that basically deals with the future of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure? I mean, the reason that we ended up using force was precisely because the president came to the conclusion that the negotiations that we were conducting with them, which were designed to ensure that there was no enrichment on the Iranian side, he basically came to the conclusion he couldn't achieve that diplomatically. Now, does he believe that's achievable? I suspect that the Iranians will come back. They may make a concession on actually enriching. I think it'll be very hard for them to give up the right of enrichment. I suspect that
Right.
the face saver for them, just like the face saver of retaliating against Al Udeid base, was to say we did it. The face saver for them will be something like we retain the right to enrich. It will be interesting to see, is there an understanding on that? The larger question here, though, Ari, is we have a ceasefire, which is very significant. Can you translate the ceasefire into what is an understanding of what the future of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure is going to be, what the future of their ballistic missile program is going to be, and what's the relationship between Iran and its proxy network?
Right. And as you're reminding everyone, those are issues that have bedeviled hawks and doves across multiple administrations, because you can have what would be, from the U.S. view, a step forward containing this. And then later you get steps backward if Iran is doing what it chooses. Ambassador Ross, with us from even as this news broke, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to fit in our shortest break, 90 seconds. We have our expert, General McCaffrey, on the other side. Major news announced by President Trump here on the ceasefire when we're back in 90 seconds. Breaking news, President Trump posting just moments ago here inside the 6 p.m. hour on the East Coast that he has reached, through the United States, organizing a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. The news of this ceasefire has not been confirmed through an official channel such as the State Department, nor yet by other countries, but it is the President of the United States posting his position on that. This ceasefire, according to President Trump's post, would begin within 6 hours. We're joined by General Barry McCaffrey, retired 4-star Army general, MSNBC military analyst. We have a battery of questions for you. We were speaking to someone you know well, Ambassador Ross, who's done a lot of Middle East diplomacy, including leading to ceasefires like this news tonight, if confirmed. So I have many questions for you, but first, your response to what the president says is this ceasefire.
Well, look, how wars end is far more long-term consequences than how they begin. On the surface, this is very good news. It's an appropriate time to stop shooting. The Iranians are at the bottom of a barrel. They have no good options, military or political. They have no allies. Most of their population despises the theocratic regime. The Israelis are tearing apart their leadership, both political and military and scientific. So they've got to get off stage. The Israelis are running out of high-tech munitions. They want to stop it. President Trump clearly does not want the war to continue. So the big question, as Ambassador Ross says, is how do we translate that into some political long-term good? How do you get them back to the table and negotiate? And how do you get them to sign a renunciation of seeking a nuclear weapon? How do you get them to say, after 46 years, don't dedicate your national purpose to eliminating Israel? And if all that happens, and there's good possibility it will come out that way, then this has been an enormous change for the better in the Middle East and for U.S. national security.
Hmm. Uh, Really interesting to get your again, first order reaction to that. On the framework, we were just covering how Ambassador Ross, yourself say this sounds, if durable, like an important, significant step for the United States under the Trump administration, as was apparently the effect of bombing. At the same time, I'm quoting from the president's post on Truth Social, where he recently posted about regime change. And within hours, top people, including the Pentagon chief, were saying no, the opposite, retracting what he posted on Truth Social. Now, in detail, this sounds different. But with that in mind, I want to read to you more of the details, get your background experience on what this sounds like. Regime change is two words. You can throw it out and take it back. This has a level of detail where the president announces that basically 6 hours from now, this would begin. For 12 hours, it will go. And if it holds, it would then be ended. This is a rather lengthy post. I'm going to read the highlights. Officially, I'm reading from this quote, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, that would be the end to the war. So does that timeline sound like other agreements you've seen? What is your reaction to what is a lengthy statement and the details here, which for veracity at least sounds more cooked, more fully baked than some of the Truth Social posts that have recently been walked back?
Yeah, well, it sounds like very good news. It sounds like both sides actually will turn the key and stop killing each other. Iran has a lot to lose and a lot to gain. Their economy is in a shambles. Their leadership, a lot of them have been killed in the last few days, few weeks. They are under economic constraints that are asphyxiating their economy. No one's going to come to their aid, not the Chinese, not the Russians. The Sunni Arab countries, principally Gulf Coast states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, despise them, fear them, and want that nuclear program ended. So I think that the challenge will be this place is an abhorrent, repressive regime. It's since 7 October, the demented attack on Israel, it has suffered the loss of most of its leverage. But it's got 46 years of history of hating the existence of Israel and the United States. So there's a long way to go, but this is very good news. And a lot of it, to be blunt, is the product of this daring, largely decisive strike by the United States on 3 nuclear sites. We should not underestimate the fact that this was a multi-billion-dollar, 30-year effort that has been set back substantially. Now, we also got to recognize they took their 900 pounds of 60% enriched HEU and moved it. We ought to assume that's the case. So they won't be out of the nuclear game until there are international inspectors on the ground verifying a signed treaty.
You referenced the U.S. action. We're following breaking news of the United States through President Trump online announcing the ceasefire between these two countries. And Israel has been in the thick of it with a lot of the conflict since the October attacks. But this is the announcement between these two. Tell us in plain English, given your military experience, what it means for the U.S. to broker this and announce this in the wake of bombing Iran. Does this imply an off-ramp for U.S. and Iran skirmishes here? Because this language, this new breaking news, does not refer to the status of the conflict between the other side of the two countries here, the U.S. and Iran.
Well, I think this is an unambiguous positive development for the Iranians, the Israelis, and us. It was clearly implemented by that magnificent Air Force attack and Navy attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. Without that, it wouldn't have happened. At the time, it surprised me. I thought it was a political disaster for President Trump with his own party, with the voting population, with the Democratic Party, but he executed it. To be honest, I think otherwise we would have continued in aimless discussions while the Iranians continued toward development of a weapon. There's been a proxy.
But General, just to put a point on it, does this then imply the end of this back and forth in your view? Or does there need to be some larger formal announcement between the U.S. and Iran?
This won't be over until there are international inspectors on the ground and the Iranians have announced we are permanently foregoing the enrichment of uranium products. That will be the only sign that's really at the end of it. They'll try and squeeze out of it in the coming weeks, days, months. They're very capable, clever people. They're brave people. They have a tremendous scientific bench. They're not going to give up this 30-year aim easily, but they got no options. I think President Trump's decisive action and that attack has just brought home to the IRGC, who I think are on their third general in command now. A bunch of those lieutenant colonels are saying, hey, this makes no sense. You old people in this theocratic dictatorship have led us down the wrong path too long. I think the regime change may come, but it's going to be from within Iran, not without.
Yeah, and although it's complex, one of the lessons of the past several decades is that even overdue regime change by the populace is complicated if it's at the end of a American military might. Syria poses a different example. Iran may yet, as you and the ambassador alluded to tonight in our breaking coverage. Thank you, General McCaffrey, as always.
Good to be with you, Aaron.
Absolutely appreciate it. As the general and I were just discussing, we are handling breaking news here. The rather sudden and dramatic announcement from President Trump that the United States has brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, coming on the heels of Iran's relatively measured counterattack after the U.S. strike supporting Israel going into Iran and using those bunker busters on the nuclear targets. This is a big story. We'll stay on it this hour, so we'll keep an eye on whether there are further confirmations or developments on that. With that said, I'll tell you what else we have coming up. An important look at the way ICE is operating right now and the alleged police ICE agent brutality against a defenseless man caught on tape. As part of the important stories we're covering, we'll be right back. We've been following breaking news. What you see on your screen is President Trump posting a fairly detailed plan for what he calls a U.S.-brokered Israel-Iran ceasefire. On the one hand, if confirmed by other parties and countries, this would be a huge development in what has been the tense situation, including Israeli bombing, U.S. bombing, and a measured Iranian response today that it resulted in no U.S. casualties. On the other hand, as we have been reporting, the president on this same topic of Iran has recently posted other items, including a reference to regime change that was quickly walked back by his most senior officials, including the Secretary of Defense. To continue reporting on what either way will be a development, because people are going to respond to what the president says is happening, we're joined by Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News White House correspondent. We have other experts standing by. This has been a time where people like you are invaluable. We can all read Truth Social. Tell us what you're reporting and your sources are saying about this rather grand announcement online from President Trump.
Well, I just got off the phone with Steve Witkoff, who is one of the top aides for President Trump, who has been in negotiations with Iran. He told me that he had been working toward negotiating a deal with these parties, but he stopped short of confirming this ceasefire. Now, he was just landing, so he told me that he was getting off a plane, was going to read the president's announcement. So that tells you a bit about what at least one top aide for the president, who you would think would be in the know on this ceasefire deal, is saying tonight. That being said, you also have the vice president, who is confirming what the president has been saying, which is that there is a ceasefire that has been brokered, that it's going to go into effect in the next 6 hours, and that will essentially end the vice president. And the president is saying this 12-day war. They say it's also interesting because if I want to read part of what Vance was just saying, he said the 12-day war appears to be effectively over. You have an opportunity now to restart a real peace process. But he went on to say it's going to require the Iranians play it smart from here. So to me, that language is really interesting because he's saying that there's a ceasefire, but he's also saying that there's still a decision to be made on the Iranian side on how to move forward. And we know that Iranians have at least publicly been saying that they're not going to surrender, that they are going to essentially retaliate against the U.S. We saw some retaliation efforts already today, though the president was very clear to say that he believes that he got a sort of heads up from Iran and that no Americans were hurt in some of the strikes that we saw against a U.S. base. But I think this is still a fluid situation. But the president, I mean, he's publicly saying that there's a ceasefire. I think it's still very critical that we hear from Israeli officials and Iranian officials to confirm what that actually means, Ari.
And to your point, Wickoff is busy, maybe in the air, but you're saying he's someone that might know more about this, and told you he was not yet up to date on this claimed development.
That's right. I got him on the phone and he said, "Look, I just landed." I said, "Well, can you just tell me a little bit about this ceasefire that was brokered, or can you at least confirm that this ceasefire was brokered?" And all he would say was, "Well, I just landed. I need to read what the president's saying." So that in some ways tells you now maybe he's just frazzled because he's getting off a plane. But again, he was one of the top negotiators that the president had talking to Iranians. But he, of course, also has a lot on his plate. He's someone that's also brokering and talking to Israelis. He's also involved in the deals and the negotiations between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So maybe Steve Witkoff is just out of the loop on this one. We do know for a fact, and I've been talking to sources all day, that the president spent the majority of his day in the Situation Room meeting with defense officials and top aides, trying to find a way to broker a peace deal here. And the president also said publicly today that he was going to be encouraging not just Iran to seek peace, but also Israel, of course, that being Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that while the U.S. was ready for a prolonged war, if it came to that, he wanted to de-escalate this situation. So if this ceasefire actually was to be brokered, as the president said, it is something that he's been essentially messaging that he really, really wanted all day, Ari.
Yamiche, thank you for that. Stay with us. Ambassador Dennis Ross, a veteran of multiple parties' administrations on Middle East diplomacy, joins us. Ambassador, your thoughts, including on what Yamiche is reporting there.
Well, I do think the statement would not be put out if, in fact, there isn't an agreement on a ceasefire. So I think, and the significance is this is a ceasefire that ends the war, the 12-day war. Ending the war doesn't mean you now have a peace. Ending the war doesn't mean that you've now resolved what the Iranian nuclear program is going to be. When the vice president says, and you were quoting this, that now the Iranians have to be smart, that basically tells you we don't have any understandings on what's going to happen going forward. One other question I have is, if Steve Witkoff wasn't quite certain, or let's just say he wasn't clear with you on this, I wonder if there were other players involved in this mediation. Do the Russians play any role? Do the Saudis play any role? Do the Qataris play any role? I suspect that there maybe have been multiple conversations, but I think what we're seeing now is we're going to see the very likelihood that we're going to see an end to this war. And then we're going to see a negotiation with the Iranians. And that negotiation is going to prove to be difficult because they're not going to sit.
And that is, just to be clear, you're referring to, I mean, we're talking about a big deal, U.S. getting somewhere with an Israeli-Iran deal, and you're saying what remains is Iran's status of its potential nuclear path, and what is still an open conflict between these two countries with the U.S.
Right. Look, I would say this. We're in a different place than we were because Iran has been dramatically weakened. Their nuclear program has been dramatically set back. Barry McCaffrey was saying it quite well. They're in a terrible situation domestically. They cannot provide electricity to their businesses, their schools, their government offices. They have shortages of water. Their currency has been completely devalued. They have had a strategy of building this ring of fire around Israel. It blew up in their face. They invested huge amounts of money in Syria and these different proxies and their nuclear infrastructure. I would put it at $500 billion over the last 30 years. Most of that is now gone. So it's in their interest to negotiate something, but they're not going to suddenly say, gee, we're giving up enrichment, we're giving up our ballistic missile program. When the vice president says they need to be smart, it implies this is the end for now. It doesn't mean it couldn't be resumed if they're not smart. So that's also a form of leverage that's being applied to the Iranians. I'll say one other thing. I do believe if Prime Minister Netanyahu was able to claim, and I think with some legitimacy, a great success, I will not be surprised if we also see Donald Trump work out with him an agreement to end the war in Gaza, the release of the hostages, Israel withdrawing, with the built-in threat that if there's any violation, they will act and nobody will question whether they will act because we've seen what the Israelis have done.
Right. Right. Well, a lot flying through the evening here. Ambassador Ross, Michelle Cinder, thanks to both of you for your reporting, your expertise. We're going to track that story and see what other developments or confirmations we can get. While ahead, we turn to another important story at home, this video that exposes ICE agents apparently beating a man at an arrest. Maya Wiley, next. Turning to new allegations about how ICE is operating under the Trump administration, there is a new video that appears to depict federal agents detaining and using violence and injuring an immigrant father of 3 United States Marines. While this type of treatment, if it is unprovoked and out of context, is wrong in any capacity, certainly against protocols, possibly illegal, again, depending on the details, this has stoked extra outrage over this family because the 48-year-old Narciso Barranco was identified by one of his own sons who said he was doing work as a landscaper when several masked men approached him, pinned him down, and then were beating him when he tried to get away from the treatment. Now, as always, the warning, the video is graphic. In those partial clips, the use of force looks excessive if he is effectively detained. His sons are American citizens and also served, as mentioned, and one says Barranco was pepper sprayed, beaten, his shoulder was dislocated, he had not received medical treatment for what they say were those pieces of results of the violence you see on camera, and they say that he hasn't got enough food or water after 24 hours in LA detention. A DHS official confirmed to the LA Times that Barranco is in custody, alleging that he, quote, swung a weed whacker directly at an agent's face and refused to comply. And they are describing at least part of what we saw on video as, quote, appropriate action that followed the agent's training. I'm joined by Maya Wiley, an SDNY civil prosecutor, human rights advocate, who also in the city of New York worked specifically on these issues in police training and alleged police brutality incidents. Welcome back, Maya. As always, I caution, we don't necessarily have the full story in the video. From a policing and legal standpoint, the video looks bad, but we don't have everything that may have happened prior. With that said, based on what you see here, one, how do you view the tactics? And two, how do you view the concern from many experts and critics that under the Trump administration, it seems that ICE and other federal agencies are ramping up use of force or violence?
Well, Ari, I mean, you said it so well. It's impossible to look at this video and not be deeply disturbed and demand an investigation of the conduct of these officers. You're right that an investigation means an investigation. But look, we see a man on the ground, and as his son points out, 5'6" 5'7" tall, 150 pounds. And we see multiple agents, many of them are quite large, and he quite clearly looks unable to create any harm to those officers. Now, that is one of the findings of fact that an investigation would undertake.
Yeah.
But everything we're seeing here is consistent with what we've heard from the Trump administration. Let's be clear. There has been an increased pressure on ICE agents, Border Patrol agents, to get their numbers up. And this is an administration that has a policing executive order that has quite explicitly said that they want to, quote, unquote, unleash law enforcement. I mean, every indicator that it's sent, including in its own executive actions, trying to create less accountability, is for ICE and an agency in the Department of Homeland Security that has iced out accountability, transparency, and oversight. This is, by the way,
Yeah.
predates this administration. We should make that clear. This is an ongoing issue for civil rights and human rights advocates. But there's no question that it's escalating, and there's no question, I think, in many of our minds, that communities are literally being targeted because of how they look. That's also racial profiling.
Yeah, and immigration policy can often try to tell folks, hey, it'll be hard when you get here, or we're not going to make it easy to get benefits, or driver's licenses has been a debate. Those are policy choices. Walk us through why it is not acceptable or policy to threaten abuse, violence, what are potentially illegal acts as a consequence for being here in an undocumented capacity.
Well, it's quite simple, Ari, really, is we have a Constitution of the United States of America. And the Constitution is quite clear and quite plain. And the interpretation of our Constitution has been quite clear and quite plain. People have the right to process that is due. That means the ability to see a judge and to be determined whether or not there's action that can be taken against them. But no one, whether you're in a facility detained or on a street corner should be treated violently. That is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. That can be a violation of the First Amendment, depending on whether someone's peacefully protesting or doing anything else. And, we should remember, you also have a constitutional right to be treated well and in humane conditions when you are in detention. I mean, we are also hearing concerns about whether or not, and not just for Mr. Barranco, but for others in detention, including children, whether there's adequate heat, whether they're getting food and nutrition. So all of these are issues that our Constitution says, yeah, you don't actually get to treat people cruelly and unusually, and you don't get to take their lives or their liberty from them. And I want to make one other point quickly, because we're hearing that Mr. Barranco may not have gotten medical treatment. We've had 52 people die in ICE custody in detention because they didn't get adequate medical treatment between 2017 and 2021. We should be very concerned that anyone treated this way could be any of us.
Understood, and important points. Maya Wiley, thank you. We'll be right back. An update on the breaking news we've been following this hour. President Trump posting online about a ceasefire plan that he says has been reached, brokered by the U.S. between Israel and Iran. We've been following the story for a few minutes now. It has not been confirmed by either government sources from those countries yet. Trump making a rather detailed announcement through his social media site, and we will be following confirmations or responses from those parties. We'll be right back. That does it for us on a big news night.